Now, the third letter from John, the salutation. The elder is writing this letter to Gaius, my friend, whom I love in the truth. Gaius was a member of a house church. The house church evidently met in the home of a man named Diotrephes, who wanted to be first in everything. Now that was one of the problems of having churches in the houses of members. One of the great problems, one of the major problems that Paul had with the church at Corinth was because the wealthy people were the ones who had houses big enough to have churches in them. And they insisted on having more say in the way the church was run, the way that what was taught and all, than they had since.
My house, my rules.
Yeah, you're my house, my rules. That's usually gambling. I want you to gather from that being a Christian does not automatically make us better. That unless we allow God to control our lives and our attitudes, control how we behave with one another, then we can be guilty of all kinds of sins. Okay, the elder is writing this letter to Gaius, my dear friend, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you are enjoying good health, that everything in your outer life is going well with you, just as your inner life is also doing well. Now, the idea of this salutation is John was sure that Gaius' inner life was going well, but he wasn't that sure that his outer life was. And the two are not one-on-one. You can have a good inner life and an outer life that's pretty tacky, or you can have the reverse. And that's going to play a big part in our study of the book of Job, because it will revolve around the relationship between our outer and our inner life, and what you can deduce from looking and making judgments based on the outer and the inner life. Here, John was sure that Gaius' inner life was doing well. He wasn't as sure of his outer life. That means his health, his
Job,
wealth, job, whatever, the outer life.
Charles, how do you, when I'm reading this, I don't read into it what you just shared with us. Is there a subtitle or a subcurrent here that is a little more difficult to pick up? Because I don't understand why you're saying what you're saying there.
He said, look, read it carefully. Don't add any. He said, I pray that you are enjoying good health and that everything in your outer life is going well with you, just like your inner life. In other words, your outer life is doing as well as your inner life. You don't get that?
I understand it. I understand the concept, but when I'm talking to my college roommate that I haven't seen in 10 years, I have no idea what his physical life is,
Yeah.
but I'm sure his inner life, his church life, his God life is doing well. So I would say something like this not knowing.
But look, that's what, you're saying just exactly what I said. Or at least sounded that way to me. That he knows that his outer life, he knows that his inner life is doing well.
Right.
And he hopes that his outer life is doing as well.
I will defer to your understanding of the words better than I do. But I don't see that as a necessary. I see it as an inference.
Here's the
I
thing.
don't see it as an automatic.
It's a fact. It's not logical. It's not something you deduce logically. It is just true. You see, in this particular case. Okay.
To be determined later.
Yeah.
Where's the next verse?
He said, I was glad when your fellow believers came and reported about your faithfulness to the truth and how you're continuing to live in the truth. Now, this is how he knew that his inner life was good. It was the fact. And he hopes his outer life is as good. He doesn't have reports about his outer life, I guess. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are continuing to live in the truth. I can really understand that. Anytime I hear that somebody that I have taught, and especially somebody in this class, is doing well, they are doing something outside. For instance, Butch, and the work you're doing with the other men in sub-Saharan Africa. When I hear about that, I want to bust my galluses, as the old saying says. And I hear other people from this class. It doesn't even have to be a spiritual thing that you're doing. When I hear about y'all enjoying your trip to Israel, and I really feel good about that, and I hope you return the feeling. Now that doesn't mean I have to feel good, or that my feeling good is a necessary part. I'm just telling you that's the way it works. And that's the reason I like to hear. The reason that I give you time to feed back and ask you how things are going with you. I want to know, as part of that mutuality of good experiences. That's the only way I know to put it.
And conversely, if you hear someone falling from the faith, someone that you know and haven't seen for a long time, maybe haven't prayed for, but then you hear that they have fallen away. That's especially hurtful,
Yes.
and more reason to pray for them.
Yeah, it works both ways, but I much prefer to hear good things.
Sure.
You are acting faithfully, my dear friends, in what you are doing for your fellow believers, even though they are strangers to you. Now, who are these fellow believers? They are a specific group of people. You'd have to know something about the way the Gentile mission was carried out to know who they are. Who would he be welcoming even if he didn't know who they were?
Missionaries.
What?
Missionaries.
Missionaries, yes. See, that's the way the early church spread. They didn't have the power of the Roman government. They couldn't use the Roman, they could use the Roman roads, anybody could use a Roman road, but they had to take care of the physical needs. You remember that one of the qualifications of elders, bishops, was that they show hospitality. And the reason for that is they would have to arrange for the hospitable welcoming of these traveling missionaries. It's a very interesting thing. We have a lot of records that let us know how valuable the missionaries found the hospitality of the house churches. The opposite could happen. If a house church was in the home of somebody that did not want that particular person to be welcomed, it could be a negative thing.
One of my greatest joys in Bible college and participating in the choir there was that we would go on choir tours to different places. And it was the biggest blessing was to be able to stay in people's homes overnight and share with them. And they were happy to share with us. That's probably the best part of such a trip.
Well, I have been, as a full-time minister, a preacher of a church, I've helped arrange those choir tours. I remember when they flooded on the second day of August, 1978, and flooded the Medina home completely out. They sent...
Bandino was destroyed.
What?
Camp Bandino was destroyed.
Yes, but I got a list of the kids and the the adults at Medina home. And I sat down the telephone, and before I got half through the membership at Oak Hills, we had people that took these flood orphans into their homes. Huh?
Refugees.
It was refugees. And that's part of, it may be stretching it a little bit, but what we have done to help the people in Houston and other places down on the coast, Port Aransas and all, is of the same nature. we opened our homes, we gathered money, and made it possible for them to survive and even thrive in very
We
unfortunate.
keep having 2 dogs.
Mine has got, we got more dogs than we need.
I hear you.
And she's got dogs on the brain.
5 dogs up there.
Charles, give us a report on something that occurred shortly after Katrina. You had a empty house next to your house, and I remember you telling us that you prayed to be helpful some way for refugees from Katrina, and a family moved into that house next to you from the effects of Katrina. Do you
Yes,
recall that?
yes.
What was the, I was familiar with that at that point, but I never heard anything beyond that.
They stayed there for a little while, as long as they needed to, and then moved on.
They didn't move back to New Orleans, they moved up to Mississippi or somewhere. And they wrote y'all thank you notes. Your wife said y'all got thank you notes
We
from
furnished,
those children.
I had just moved back from Corpus, where I'd been living in an
Oh,
apartment,
okay.
and I was able to outfit them with at least a 1-bedroom,
Yeah.
Yes,
apartment.
yes.
Never knew.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about here. And that's the way that the early church spread. They had no governmental help. In fact, they had enmity from the government. They had no real wealthy members, although there were people from the Praetorian Guard. That means the people who,
Secret Service.
what?
The Secret Service.
Secret Service? Well, that's pretty well what it was. The Praetorian Guard was the personal bodyguard of the Roman emperor. And Paul had taught and converted some of the members. When he was in prison, they also formed the guards of the prisoners of the Roman emperor. In other words, they were not only his special bodyguard, but his G-men. If you want to, I'll make a pun just like you did. And anyway, but that's the way the church grew. Do you know what? It is still the best way for the church to grow.
If it weren't for that, my wife would have not become a Christian down in Mexico.
Yes. That welcoming, caring attitude where you serve the person. And now, the opposite can happen, and does happen, and does happen right here in this. He said, they have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. Now, notice there's a two-step thing. Not only do you welcome them when they're in your city, but you send them on the way. That's a financial sending. It's making sure they have enough finances or supplies to go on their way.
to at least get to the next destination.
Yes, and you send them on their way. You should do this because these people went out on behalf of the name and took nothing from the unbelievers.
Now I understand why you're saying they're missionaries.
You see that they did not depend at all on unbelievers. And the unbelievers are not only the imperial government, but the citizens. There was always a majority of unbelievers in any area. I'm talking about just those that were faithful to the pagan idolaters. And he said, they didn't take anything from the unbelievers. We're therefore, and now here is the phrase that I chose, morally obligated to show to such people support in order that we may become partners with them in the truth. It is a moral obligation. There's no rule, there's no law, it is just a moral obligation.
John keeps talking about, he says, living in the truth. Here he says, partners for the truth. Is he using truth as an equivalent to who Jesus was, essentially? He's not talking about the truth in all of its legal...
No, he is talking about the message of Jesus and about Jesus.
Which again would be in refutation to the Gnostic heresy.
Yes. See, it's both the message of Jesus, that is the one he taught, and about him, the gospel story. And it is, whether this includes the incarnate, the written down, the inspired word, I doubt it, because there wasn't a whole lot of the New Testament written by this time. It just hadn't been written down. So I think it's personal that he's talking about. I know that the anti-Gnostic part of it was very much personal. In other words, it's what they believed or didn't believe about Jesus. He was the Son of God incarnate, and the Gnostics denied that. Going on, we become partners with them for the truth. I can think of nothing better. I'm going to go back to Butch there. I feel really a partnership with the work that you 5 men, I think it was, are doing in sub-Saharan Africa. I don't know all that much about it. It's a good thing I don't. I might tell people that shouldn't know about it. Butch and I decided that it oughtn't to be publicized because it might alert the enemies of the gospel. But it's okay. One thing that you will find about wicked people is that they believe they're going to win whether they have any reason to believe that or not. That's one of the strange things, and I don't understand it. I have watched more television in the last couple of years than I've rest of my life put together, and I notice how
That's a funny statement.
I notice how wicked people never consider that they're going to lose. They just assume they're going to win. And that fits right in with the crucifixion of Jesus. Paul says if they had known what they were doing, they wouldn't have done it. But they don't know. I don't know whether that's part of the psychology of evil.
Well, they take after their father, the devil, and that's how the devil believes.
Well-
He still believes he's gonna win. I mean,
Yes,
I don't know how that possibly.
Susan, do you have any? You don't speak for the devil, huh?
Well, but Susan, but back to the question about wicked people think they're going to win. Some of the studies I've seen suggest that about 5% of the population is pathological, in the sense that, well, years ago in the convenience store business, we learned that 10% of the population was pretty much incorruptible. They would starve to death before they'd take a dime that wasn't theirs. About 5% of the population was pathological and would steal no matter if you stood there and looked at them, watched them, they'd steal and then blame you for it. And that meant that roughly 85% of the people were honest as long as you kept it. Another whole story, but would that be fair to say that if a person is in fact pathological, doesn't maybe even quite understand the difference between right and wrong? Is that a fair description of pathological, Susan, or not?
Well, they may know the difference, they just don't care.
They just don't care.
And they don't feel guilt. And when you don't feel guilt, you don't feel anxiety, and usually that means you don't think you're gonna get caught because you're not afraid. But
So
you're
it
still
doesn't
making the image of
occur to
God.
them that they're gonna lose.
Sorry?
It doesn't occur to them that they're gonna lose. And
No, they try to figure it out, but they won't, but they don't feel guilty. That's the main thing.
Therefore, punishment is no deterrent to them.
No, they don't, they figure they can outsmart it.
Okay. We wrote about these things to the church.
Yeah.
But Diotrephes, whose ambition is to be the first in everything. What does that phrase, to be first in everything,
Bless you.
mean to you?
Means I want to avoid that person.
Well, you answered my question exactly like it was asked, but that was...
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the honor.
But what kind of a person is that?
Arrogant.
What?
An arrogant person.
Arrogant? Selfish?
I would say they're their own God. They don't see any fault with themselves.
It can very easily go that far. It can go that far even if they don't think that they're divine or anything, but practically they are their own God. They decide who and what is going to happen. And I think it's the ones that are not trying to think of themselves as divine or as special messengers that cause the most trouble. They can always say, I just want what's right. And you're not it. That's what I get out of that. whose ambition is to be first in everything. Arrogant, ambitious, arrogantly ambitious, ambitiously arrogant, highly self-centered. I'm going to have my way.
When it's kind of, yeah, I think that's good, closed-mindedness.
Yeah.
I think that the image that I get here is he's a person who wants to have things his own way. So he doesn't want to be open to anything else. And if you aren't doing it his way, you're not doing it right.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're, what was it? The old statement said it's, and if you're in the army, it's either the army's way or the highway. But this is a spiritual thing, and he is going to control. He's a control freak, to use some of the slang terms. Now, this is not because he's right. This is because he's who he is. Diotrephes did not consult right and wrong. He consulted what he wanted. See, what he says is, I wrote these things to the church, but Diotrephes, whose ambition is to be the first in everything, would not accept us. Now, what an arrogant fellow. John was an apostle. He was a recognized apostle. He was a beloved teacher of the church in Ephesus, and yet Diotrephes said, no way, and made it stick. How arrogant.
While we're on the subject of wicked people, I really had a hard time with the sermon today. Because this week, somebody shot my kitten with a BB gun, you know, and it's like, and I'm supposed to see the image of God in them. You know, it is a real hard thing with wicked people. I know, to listen to the sermon this morning about how all of us have God's image in them.
Hey, I'll tell you what.
It's hard to see it in some people, I guess. And
I'll tell you what.
I have to pray about it.
Okay, you did the right thing. You did not just automatically, hypocritically, you said, I have to pray about that.
I have to pray for God to see people as He sees them. 'Cause I think some of them are absolutely lousy. More than ours, you know.
Yes.
Max did put a little bit of a qualifier that I heard when he said, some people suppress it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was maybe a little too subtle.
Yeah, he was gracious Max, you
Because
know.
I'm thinking about Hitler and other folks who
Yeah,
are
and we can all
certainly
fill in
trying to
those
find God's
blanks.
image in something
Okay.
like that.
I'm glad y'all worked that
It's tough though.
because there are some people that the only thing you can do is pray for yourself about them. Because they are, they act so wickedly that only with God's help. And it might be good to commend them to God. Do you know what I say? I do that sometimes.
Commend or consign?
Well, what I meant, I didn't mean commend in the idea. You just turn them over to God and say, look.
I thought you said condemn.
No. No, that's the opposite of what I said.
Although that's a feeling that sometimes works real well.
It's hard for a human being to separate behavior and person. You know, think about our own children. When they deliberately misbehave or do things that we ask them to do, or not do what we ask them to do, or do what they're not supposed to do, we still discipline them, and we still love them, but we still do not accept their behavior. And that's the hard thing about someone outside of the sphere of our families. When we think about, you know, different actions that that person does that's atrocious, it doesn't say we have to accept that behavior. And it's super hard because we associate behavior and person to, you know, to accept the person as being in the image of God.
Well, I like what she did. I think you did well. And
All I can do.
what?
That's all I can do, really.
Yes.
You know, I'm not gonna go seek revenge, I can't, you know,
I'll tell you what. There's studies that show that people who are cruel to animals,
oh, yeah, exactly, that's the scary part.
yes, are
That's just the.
very often cruel to people, grow up to be cruel to people.
Starts with animals.
Yeah.
Well, I found that the most difficult situation for me is dealing with people who think that I'm not open-minded and that I should be tolerant of everything. And to say that loving God is the right way to go is just the example of a closed mind.
Well,
I commend everyone that has said something right now, because what y'all have shown me is that y'all are listening to Scripture, y'all are studying the gospel, and y'all are doing the right thing. Everything that every one of y'all has said is scriptural. It's good. And we do need to hear this sort of thing.
Thank you.
Because in our daily lives, you know, you go through so many things, and you think, oh, what am I going to do here? What should I do here? Well, give it to God. Pray.
well, that's what I meant, commend it to God. Tell him, look, God, I am just not in a position, emotional, spiritual position, where I can deal with them right now. You take it over.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll tell you, God will do the right thing.
Yes,
Now,
amen,
what-
that's right.
He may, that's one thing you can assure, whether you ever know it or not.
And maybe I could pray, and then this person who did this, maybe they'll turn and they won't stay on that path. You know?
How's the cat okay?
The cat is okay.
Cat's
And
okay?
honestly, if I hadn't seen the x-ray of where my vet showed me the
You had to go
shrapnel,
to the vet?
the shrapnel, of course.
It went inside, penetrated.
Shrapnel and the exit wound, I wouldn't have believed it, you know, it was unbelievable to me. But anyway, sorry, don't want
Hey,
to.
Charles, I got a
I
got a question I want to ask you.
What?
It says, whose ambition is to be first in everything.
Uh-huh.
What about our society, people whose ambition is to be last in everything and not be productive and have the rest of us drag them along? Is there any?
I'll tell you what, I don't think they're too much better than the ones that want to be first in everything. Yeah.
Moving on along.
But see, that again, I would turn over to God.
Okay.
It's not my,
That's the extreme, the other extreme of this.
excuse me a minute. Okay, all right. So when I come, I will remind him of the evil things he is doing. He is spouting wicked nonsense. I like that translation.
Is it that he's saying this, or he's causing other people to say it?
No, he is saying this.
Okay.
See, that's one of the things he's doing. He would he wouldn't accept the message that John had sent to the church. And in addition to that, he was spouting wicked nonsense. And I'll tell you what, I sure would hate to have an apostle of Jesus Christ tell the world that I was spouting wicked nonsense. That's pretty powerful condemnation.
Well, you remember what happened to Ananias and Sapphira?
Yeah.
Achan in the Old Testament.
Yeah. All right. He is not only refusing to receive the traveling missionaries, but is throwing those believers out of the church who want to help them. Now, this is the utmost wickedness. In other words, he is unchurching the people who are doing right because they are doing right.
Excommunicating them?
Yes, that's what it means. My dear friend, don't imitate what is evil, but what is good. The person who is doing good things is from God. However, the person who is doing evil things has never seen God. That's the phrase that it occurs again and again in one form or another. Jesus says, I don't know you, or you can't see the kingdom of heaven unless, and it's the utmost judgment of God on people. If you have not ever even seen God, I'm not talking about his physical appearance, but you've never seen him to know, that means to know him. You've never seen the good.
Charles, what about the prodigal son?
The what?
The prodigal son, had he ever seen Jesus, God?
I don't know what the connection is.
Well, let's take the father. In my mind, he's representing God in this situation, and the younger son convinces him to give him his inheritance earlier, and he goes out and wastes all of it, engages in all kinds of activities which would indicate a person who has not seen, or even if that person has seen God, has rejected God.
Well, what?
I would submit in rebuttal to the question, or in answer to the question, the one who maybe didn't see God was the older brother.
Yes, that's.
But what about the prodigal son?
Here's the thing.
No. He first was that.
No, here's the thing.
He reflected on the representative of God, his father, and repented after he reflected on it. So did he know him? Yes, he did know him.
You see, he came to know him.
He came to know him, yeah.
That's right. See, somebody who doesn't know God can come to know God. The person who is doing good things is from God. However, the person who is doing evil things has never seen God. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even the truth bears witness to this. We also bear witness to his character, and you know that our witness is true. Final greetings. I have many things to write to you, but I don't want to use pen and ink. Now, I've often wondered why he chose to say it that way. It may mean that he just doesn't want to write it. He wants to see face to face, which would be my choice in the meaning of the phrase. I am hoping to come to you soon, and then we will talk face to face.
It's kind of similar to what Paul did with Corinth.
Yes. Peace be with you. Your friends send greetings. Greet our friends by name.
Charles, in verse 12, I know sometimes I get very hung up on words and how they are used, but I also understand words are very important in how they're used. You used the phrase, even the truth. Truth is the word I want to focus on, bears witness of this. The truth is the gospel?
The truth here is the message on Jesus and about Jesus.
Okay, and going back to verse 7, you used the phrase, people went out on behalf of the name and took nothing from the believers. The word name, you capitalized in that setting. The name would be the gospel again, the truth that's being given out. My
Where?
question,
Oh,
in verse 7, you used the word name, you capitalized it.
Well,
Why didn't you capitalize the word truth?
this idea there is people who bore the name Christian.
Okay. But the truth, why didn't you make more emphasis on the truth? Because to me, the truth represents, it does represent the name, doesn't it?
Coming from a messianic understanding, I think the name has to do with the name that people didn't speak, the holy name of God.
The Jewish background there.
Yeah.
Jewish background, yeah, I think that's what's intended here.
But were these Jewish folks that he was speaking to?
But here's the thing. There were Jews in the church in Ephesus, but the Gentiles also accepted
That reverence.
some of the reverence of the name.
And over again, John uses truth and has Jesus using that expression in a way that implied that if you, for example, when he's having this disagreement, if you will, with the Jewish leaders who was challenging his authority to speak, and he said famously in what was it, in 8:32 in John, when he says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Later on, he says, I am the way, the what?
And the truth.
So he equates himself to truth. John expresses it that way. I think, isn't it fair to say that John uses truth differently than anybody else who writes, including Paul?
Yes, he does. It's always richer in John. For some reason, he uses the word truth in places that other New Testament writers use other words.
And for John, it was the absolute ultimate refutation of Gnosticism.
Yes, and he always was anti-Gnostic in everything he wrote, because it just really got under his skin, if you'll let me use that phrase, that anybody would deny that Jesus was the Messiah, the Christ of God, man, both physical and spiritually. Okay, that's the end of this lesson.